Kim Ara had exactly 4 seconds to decide if her life as a ghost ended tonight. The man standing in the doorway of the penthouse kitchen didn't care about the fine china she was drying. He was looking for the soldier hiding behind the apron. In his world, a blown cover wasn't a mistake. It was a death sentence. "You are coming with me to the Jang wedding anniversary." Lee Do-Hyun's voice sliced through the hum of the refrigerator like a katana through silk. No request, no preamble. Just a cold directive that threatened to shatter 11 months of perfect, invisible service. Ara's hands remained steady in the steaming water, scrubbing a crystal flute that suddenly felt like a live grenade. She didn't flinch. She didn't turn. A maid was part of the furniture, silent, obedient, and blind. But the daughter of a legendary commander didn't see furniture. She saw tactical geometry. 3 exits, 2 guards in the hallway with suppressed submachine guns. One primary threat blocking the only door, Lee Do-Hyun. The silent hawk moved into the kitchen, his $50,000 platinum watch catching the light as he leaned against the marble island. He was 6'2" of disciplined violence wrapped in a bespoke black suit, watching her with the predatory patience of a man who already knew her secrets. "Sir, I believe there has been a misunderstanding. I don't make mistakes, Ara." He stepped closer, the scent of expensive sandalwood and cold iron filling her senses. "I chose you specifically." Her pulse, usually a steady 60 beats per minute, spiked into a war rhythm. "No mistake," Lee Do-Hyun repeated, his voice dropping an octave as he breached the invisible boundary of the kitchen island. He didn't just walk. He glided with the silent, predatory grace of a man accustomed to the weight of a holster. "You will be my date to the Jang anniversary. You will wear the dress I've selected. You will stand at my side as my equal." Ara didn't move, her hands still submerged in the cooling, soapy water. To any other observer, she was a dutiful servant paralyzed by a sudden, terrifying promotion. But beneath the surface, her tactical brain was screaming. Attending Jang Taesung's anniversary was a death trap. The Iron Serpent organization's headquarters was a fortress of facial recognition software and elite sentries. To go there as the date of the Silent Hawk was to invite the highest level of scrutiny in the underworld. "Sir, I am a maid," she said, her voice a practiced, soft melody of humility. "To bring me would be an insult to the chairman. It would reflect poorly on the Black Crane Syndicate." "It is a calculated insult, Ara, one I intend to deliver personally." Do-Hyun reached out, his fingers brushing the steam rising from the sink. He didn't touch her, but the proximity felt like the cold press of a barrel against her temple. "Besides, we both know you aren't just a maid. A maid doesn't check the reflection in a wine glass to track the movement of the guards in the hallway. A maid doesn't keep her center of gravity low enough to draw a concealed blade in 0.8 seconds. Ara's breath hitched. She finally turned, her dark, intelligent eyes meeting his piercing gaze. For a heartbeat, the mask of Kim Ara, the quiet servant, slipped. In its place was the daughter of a commander, a woman whose lineage was etched in the secret history of Korean intelligence. "How long?" she whispered, the submissive tilt of her head vanishing. Do-Hyun leaned in, the faint scent of sandalwood and expensive tobacco enveloping her. A rare, dangerous smile ghosted across his lips, the kind of smile that preceded a massacre. "Since the day you applied for the position. Your ghost persona is flawless to the untrained eye, but I've spent my life hunting ghosts." He straightened his perfectly tailored cuffs, his dominant aura filling the room until the kitchen felt like a cage. "The car leaves at 7. The dress is in your quarters. If you're as good as your father was, you'll survive the night." He turned to leave, his boots clicking with rhythmic finality on the marble. "And Ara," he added over his shoulder, his hand on the doorframe, "don't bother looking for your sister in the staff files tonight. We're going to the wedding because that is where the trail leads. Wear the satin. It hides the silhouette of a thigh holster better than cotton." He vanished into the hallway, leaving her alone in the silence. Ara looked down at her hands. They weren't shaking, but the soapy water was cold. The mission had changed. The maid was dead. The weapon was being unsheathed. The memory didn't come in fragments. It hit like a concussive blast, cold and sharp. Before the satin dresses and the marble floors of Do-Hyun's penthouse, there had been the white noise of a tactical headset and the sterile scent of the National Intelligence Service headquarters. 3 years ago, Kim Ara had been the agency's Silver Scalpel, the finest infiltration specialist of her generation. She was the pride of her father's legacy, a woman who could dismantle a regime with a laptop and a suppressed P-226. But the agency's loyalty had a ceiling, and that ceiling collapsed the night her younger sister, Minna, disappeared from a university campus in Seoul. "We cannot burn an entire overseas network for one girl, Ara," her director had said, his voice as flat as the dossiers on his desk. "The Iron Serpent's trafficking routes are part of a larger geopolitical play. We observe. We do not intervene." The larger play was a death sentence for Minna. Ara remembered the exact moment her allegiance snapped. It wasn't a slow burn. It was the chilling realization that the state she protected viewed her sister as acceptable collateral damage. That night, the Silver Scalpel went dark. She didn't just resign, she erased herself. She scrubbed her biometrics from the central server, burned her passports, and walked out of the NIS building into a rainy Seoul midnight, a ghost born of grief and cold fury. She spent months in the mud of the underworld, trading her elite skills for whispers. The trail was a jagged line of blood and broken promises that led straight to the Iron Serpent organization, and specifically to the shipping containers controlled by the rival families. Minna hadn't been a random target. She was a trophy, a message sent to their father, the retired commander, from the shadows of the criminal elite. To get to Minna, Ara had to become someone invisible, someone beneath notice. A maid was the perfect Trojan horse. She had spent 11 months scrubbing floors and pouring tea for Lee Do-Hyun, waiting for the one slip in security, the one guest list, the one invitation that would put her in the same room as the men who traded in human lives. Now, standing in her small servants' quarters, Ara looked at the black satin gown laid out on her bed like a funeral shroud. The fabric was expensive, but to her, it was just another uniform. She reached into the hidden compartment behind her wardrobe, pulling out the ceramic blade and the ultra-slim transmitter she'd smuggled from her former life. The agency had taught her how to save a country. Her father had taught her how to hunt. But tonight, she wasn't an agent or a daughter. She was a woman who had walked through fire to find her sister, and if the Iron Serpent stood in her way, she would burn their empire to the ground to bring Minna home. The transformation was a clinical affair. Mrs. Han, the syndicate's veteran fixer of appearances, didn't treat Ara like a debutante. She treated her like a blade being polished for a duel. There were no soft words, only the sharp tug of brushes and the pressurized hiss of setting spray. Under Mrs. Han's silent direction, a team of stylists erased the weary maid and sculpted a woman of lethal elegance. The gown was a masterpiece of midnight satin that clung to Ara's frame like liquid shadow. It was deceptively simple, with a high neckline that spoke of modesty and a back that plunged low enough to reveal the tension in her shoulder blades. As the final pin was tucked into her hair, now a sleek obsidian river, Ara looked in the mirror. The porcelain skin and intelligent eyes remained, but the submissive slouch was gone. In its place was a regal, cold authority that could stop a heart. "You look like your father's daughter," Mrs. Han whispered, her only comment of the evening, before handed her a clutch just large enough for a garrote and a burner phone. When Ara stepped into the foyer, Lee Do-Hyun was waiting. He stood by the elevator, his silhouette framed by the panoramic glass of the Seoul skyline. He didn't offer a compliment. He simply tracked her movement with a slow, predatory sweep of his eyes, nodding the way she moved in the 4-inch heels, with the balance of a fighter, not a model. The drive to the Jang estate was a descent into a heavy, charged silence. The interior of the armored Maybach smelled of expensive leather and the ozone of the city's rain. Do-Hyun sat inches away, his dominant presence a physical weight. "Jang Tae-sung is a man of tradition," Do-Hyun said, his voice low as the car wove through the neon-lit streets of Gangnam. "He values lineage. He will look at you and see a maid he thinks I am using to spit on his carpet. But his wife, Hyrin, she is the one who will see the steel under the silk. If you break character for even a microsecond, we don't leave that ballroom." He reached out, his gloved hand catching her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. The car's interior lights flickered over his sharp cheekbones. "Tell me, Ara, When you see the men who took your sister tonight, will you be a professional, or will you be a liability? Ara didn't flinch. She leaned into his touch, her eyes as cold as the platinum watch on his wrist. I've spent 11 months scrubbing your floors, Director Lee. I know how to clean up a mess. Tonight, I'm just changing the tools I use. Do-Hyun held her stare for a beat too long, a flash of something, respect, perhaps even hunger crossing his features. He released her as the car slowed, the iron gates of the Serpent's lair swinging open. Then let's give them a show, he murmured. The iron gates of the Jang estate didn't just open. They yawned like the jaws of a beast. As the Maybach purred up the winding driveway, the opulence of the Iron Serpent's stronghold felt suffocating. A sea of white marble, top-tier security details in crisp suits, and the hum of power that only comes from decades of sanctioned violence. When the door opened, Lee Do-Hyun stepped out first, adjusting the button of his suit with a lethal, calm precision. He reached back, offering his hand to Ara. As her fingers brushed his palm, the silent pact between them solidified. She wasn't the girl who scrubbed his floors anymore. She was the ghost in the machine, draped in midnight satin. The grand ballroom was a kaleidoscope of high society rot. Diamonds flashed under heavy chandeliers, but Ara's eyes were already mapping the exits. She saw the 6 men by the north balcony, guards, likely armed with subcompacts. She noted the blind spots behind the floral arrangements. Beside her, Do-Hyun's presence was a physical shield, his dominant energy drawing every eye in the room like a gravitational pull. A hush rippled through the crowd as they approached the host. Jang Tae-sung stood at the center of the room, a titan of the old world with salt and pepper hair and a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. But it was the woman at his side, Seo Hyrin, who made the hairs on Ara's neck stand up. Hyrin didn't look at Do-Hyun. She looked through him, her sharp, obsidian eyes locking onto Ara with the focus of a hawk identifying a counterfeit. Chairman Jang, Do-Hyun greeted, his voice a smooth, dangerous melody. A milestone worth celebrating. I brought a guest. I believe you've seen her around my estate, pouring tea. The insult was naked. A low murmur erupted among the nearby lieutenants. To bring a domestic servant to the Iron Serpent's inner sanctum was a declaration of war disguised as a date. Jang's expression hardened, his jaw tightening as he looked at Ara with dismissive contempt. However, Hyrin stepped forward, her silk gown whispering against the floor. She didn't look insulted, she looked intrigued. She circled Ara slowly, her gaze lingering on the curve of Ara's neck, the stillness of her hands, and the way her weight remained perfectly centered, ready for a strike. A maid, Hyrin's voice was like velvet over glass. She stopped inches from Ara, her eyes narrowing. You have a very peculiar way of standing for a girl who spends her days on her knees scrubbing floors, my dear. That is the posture of someone used to being obeyed, not someone who obeys. Ara didn't blink. She offered a shallow, polite bow, exactly the right depth for a servant, yet executed with a grace that felt disturbingly like a threat. The chairman's home requires a certain discipline, madame. I simply carry it with me. Hyrin's smile didn't reach her eyes. She leaned in, her voice a ghost of a whisper. I've known many lions, girl. You aren't a lamb. You're just a different kind of predator. Before Ara could respond, a commotion stirred at the far end of the ballroom. The guest of honor was approaching, and the air in the room suddenly turned freezing. The ballroom fell into a suffocating silence as the guest of honor cut through the sea of tuxedos and silk. Captain Alistair Thorne didn't walk with the swagger of a mobster. He moved with the rigid, terrifying efficiency of a man who had spent his life in the kill zones of the world. As the groom of this unholy alliance between the Iron Serpents and the Colombo family, he was supposed to be the prize. Instead, he looked like a predator who had just scented blood. Jang Tae-sung stepped forward, a triumphant smile stretching across his weathered face. Captain Thorne, allow me to introduce. The words died in the air. Thorne didn't look at the chairman. He didn't look at Lee Do-Hyun. His gaze locked onto Kim Ara, and for the first time that evening, the mask of the stoic soldier shattered. His eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief giving way to a bone-deep recognition. Ara felt the atmospheric pressure in the room shift. Her tactical brain screamed, exposure. She knew Thorn. They had bled together in a rain-slicked alley in Macau 3 years ago when she was still the silver Scalpel, and he was the NATO attaché who owed her his life. The silence stretched, agonizing and brittle. Then Thorn did the unthinkable. In a room filled with the most ruthless criminals in the hemisphere, he snapped his heels together. The sound was like a gunshot. His back went ramrod straight, and with a precision that echoed through the hollowed-out hall, he brought his hand to his brow in a crisp, formal military salute. It wasn't a gesture for a maid. It was a salute for a superior, a salute for a legend. "Commander," Thorn said, his voice ringing with a level of respect that made the Iron Serpent lieutenants reach instinctively for their holsters. The gasp that rippled through the ballroom was collective. Jang Tisung's face drained of color, his hand tightening on his cane until his knuckles turned white. Beside her, Ara felt Lee Do-Hyun's posture shift, not in surprise, but in preparation. He had anticipated the explosion, he just hadn't told her how loud it would be. Seo Hyrin's eyes flared with a terrifying realization. "A maid," she hissed, her voice a venomous whip. "Alistair, you are saluting a servant." "She is no servant," Thorn replied, his hand dropping but his eyes never leaving Ara's. His voice carried a hidden warning, a frantic subtext only she could read. "Run, they know who you are now. She is the woman who burned the Vladivostok cell to the ground single-handedly. If she is here, none of us are safe." The illusion of the evening vanished. The music stopped. The silent hawk stepped half an inch in front of Ara, his hand vanishing into the breast of his jacket. The masquerade was over. The war had begun. The transition from ballroom to the fortified sanctuary of the estate's library happened in a blur of drawn steel and calculated retreat. The heavy oak doors thudded shut, muffling the chaotic roar of the gala-turned battlefield. Inside the soundproofed walls, the air was still, heavy with the scent of old paper and the sharp, metallic tang of Do-Hyun's unsheathed handgun. Ara didn't wait for an explanation. She pivoted, her back to a shelf of leather-bound classics, her fingers already finding the ceramic blade hidden in the folds of her satin skirt. "You knew Thorn would be here," she breathed, her voice a jagged edge. "You used my face as a flare to light up the whole room. My cover is gone. Minna is as good as dead if they move her now." Do-Hyun didn't look like a man who had just lost a strategic advantage. He moved to a mahogany desk, holstering his weapon with a click of finality. "Your cover wasn't a shield, Ara. It was a cage. As long as you were a maid, you were limited by the shadows. To save your sister, you don't need a duster. You need the full weight of the black crane." He tapped a sequence into a hidden keypad on the desk's surface. A holographic display flickered to life, bathing his sharp features in a ghostly blue light. "You think you've been working alone for 11 months. Every lead you stumbled upon, every whisper you heard in the staff quarters, I placed them there. I've been clearing the path for you since the moment you stepped into my foyer." Ara froze, the blade still tight in her grip. "Why?" "Because the Iron Serpent and the Colombo family are a cancer on the ports I control," Do-Hyun said, stepping toward her. The predatory intensity in his eyes had shifted into something else, a shared, dark purpose. "And because I don't like seeing a weapon of your caliber being used to scrub floors." He reached out, not to touch her, but to hand her a small, encrypted drive. "Marco isn't waiting for the wedding to end. Thorn's salute panicked them. They're moving the final shipment to Pier 47 tonight. Minna is in the 3rd container on the manifest." The coordinates glowed on the screen, a death warrant for the men who had taken her sister. Ara looked at the drive, then up at the man who had played God with her life for nearly a year. The silent hawk wasn't her master, and he wasn't just her employer. He was her accomplice. The gala is a diversion, she realized, the tactical pieces clicking into place. "You're staying here to keep their eyes on the threat while I go to the docks." "Go," Do-Hyun commanded, his voice a low, resonant rumble. "The car is waiting at the service exit. Save your sister, Ara. I'll ensure no one leaves this house to stop you." For the first time, Ara didn't bow. She nodded, one professional to another, and vanished into the secret passage behind the shelves. The weapon was no longer just unsheathed. It was mid-strike. The salt air at Pier 47 tasted of industrial grease and impending rain. Port Newark was a labyrinth of rusted iron and shadows, a graveyard for secrets that the tide refused to wash away. Ara moved through the stacks of shipping containers not as a maid or a ghost, but as a predator reclaiming her territory. The black satin dress was gone, replaced by tactical charcoal gear that allowed her to vanish into the gloom, though she kept the drive Do-Hyun had given her tucked against her skin like a talisman. She didn't sneak toward the center of the operation. She walked into the light of the floodrolls, her hands raised in a display of calculated vulnerability. Within seconds, the red dots of laser sights danced across her chest. "I'm done with the black crane," she shouted, her voice echoing off the corrugated steel. "Do-Hyun is a dead man walking. He's burning the wedding as we speak, and I'm not going down with his ship." 4 men emerged from the darkness, their weapons leveled. Among them was Marco, the Colombo family's cold-blooded strategist. He stepped forward, his eyes scanning Ara with a mixture of lust and lethal suspicion. He had heard the reports from the gala. The silver scalpel had been unmasked. "The legendary agent seeks asylum," Marco sneered, the barrel of his suppressed pistol hovering inches from her forehead. "Or is this just another performance?" "It's an exchange," Ara countered, her voice steady even as she felt the cold steel of the gun. She reached into her pocket with agonizing slowness, pulling out a decoy drive she'd prepared months ago. "This contains the bypass codes for Do-Hyun's private security network. I give you the crane's throat, and you give me the girl in container 402. We both know the Serpents are finished after tonight. Why stay on a sinking dock?" Marco hesitated, the greed in his eyes warring with his instinct for survival. He reached out, his fingers closing around the drive. He signaled to his men, a sharp jerk of his chin toward the towering stack of containers behind him. "Check the drive. If it's real, she gets her sister's corpse. If it's a trick, she joins her in the water." Ara allowed them to lead her deeper into the belly of the beast. Every step was a tactical calculation. She noted the position of the snipers on the crane gantries and the rhythm of the guards' patrols. She was playing the most dangerous hand of her life, feigning a betrayal to bypass the perimeter she could never have breached by force. As they approached the rusted doors of the 3rd container, a muffled cry from within shattered Ara's professional composure for a fraction of a second. "Minna." "Open it," Marco commanded, his smile thin and cruel. The heavy iron bolt slid back with a groan that sounded like a scream. Ara tensed, her muscles coiled springs. Waiting for the exact millisecond, the light hit the interior to turn the gambit into a massacre. The container doors swung open, exhaling a draft of stale air and terror. In the flickering amber light of the dock lamps, Ara saw them, dozens of women huddled on thin mats, their eyes wide with the hollow stare of the broken. In the far corner, a small, trembling figure looked up, her face streaked with dirt but unmistakable. "Minna," Ara whispered, the name a jagged prayer. The girl's eyes widened, a spark of recognition cutting through the trauma. But as Ara stepped forward, the heavy click of a hammer cocking back echoed against the steel walls. Marco stepped into the threshold, his face contorted in a mask of triumph. He wasn't looking at the drive anymore. He was looking at the way Ara's gaze had softened. "A mother hen after all," Marco spat, his voice dripping with venom. "The drive is encrypted with a black crane dead man's switch, Ara. You didn't come here to betray him. You came here to die with her." The guards fanned out, flanking the exit, their rifles creating a cage of muzzles. Ara stood between the gunmen and the shipping container, her silhouette sharp against the darkness. She was cornered, outgunned, and trapped in a steel box, but she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like the silver scalpel. "You should have checked the timestamp on that encryption, Marco," Ara said, her voice dropping to a terrifying, calm hollow. "It's not a switch, it's a beacon." She didn't wait for his reaction. She moved. The first guard went down before he could pull the trigger, Ara's ceramic blade finding the soft tissue of his throat in a blur of gray motion. She used his falling body as a shield, the container erupting into a deafening roar of gunfire as Marco's men panicked. Lead chewed into the steel walls, sparks flying like angry hornets. Ara dove behind a stack of wooden crates, her hands moving with mechanical precision. She pulled a flashbang from her tactical belt, the one Do-Hyun had hidden in the car's armrest. "Close your eyes," she screamed to the girls behind her. A blinding white light shattered the night, followed by a concussive wave that sent the guards reeling. In the chaos, Ara rose, a shadow amongst the smoke. She moved through the disorientation with lethal intent, her movements a violent ballet of strikes and disarms. She wasn't just fighting for her life, she was clearing a path for the innocent. Outside, the low, rhythmic thrum of black crane helicopters began to vibrate through the pier. The raid had begun, but Marco, blinded and bleeding, swung his weapon wildly toward the container where Minna lay. "If I lose the cargo," he roared, "no one gets it." Ara threw herself into the line of fire, her body a physical barrier between the bullet and her sister, her finger tightening on the trigger of a scavenged pistol. The world narrowed to the space between her heartbeats. The roar of the black crane helicopters drowned out Marco's scream as the first tactical team breached the pier. Before he could pull the trigger, a single, high-caliber round from a distant rooftop, the Silent Hawk's personal signature, shattered the air, and Marco collapsed into the oil-slicked puddles of Pier 47. Silence followed, broken only by the sobbing of the women in the container. Ara didn't look at the fallen. She lunged toward Minna, pulling her sister into an embrace that felt like the first breath of air after a lifetime underwater. "I have you," Ara whispered, her tactical gear stained with the cost of the rescue. "I have you, and I am never letting go." 1 year later, the penthouse that once felt like a gilded cage had been transformed. The Second Chance's foundation didn't operate out of a sterile office. It ran from a high-tech hub funded by the Crane's vast resources and shielded by Ara's elite intelligence networks. They were no longer mob boss and maid. They were architects of a new kind of justice. Ara stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the sun rise over the Han River. She wore a simple white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal the faint scars of her past. Behind her, the door opened. Lee Do-Hyun entered, his dominant presence tempered by a rare, quiet ease. He didn't carry a weapon. He carried a file on a new trafficking cell operating out of Jeju. "The girls from the pier have been relocated," he said, standing beside her. "Minna's scholarship was approved this morning. She's safe, Ara, truly safe." Ara looked at the man who had seen through her ghost and forced her back into the light. He had given her the resources to dismantle the empires that had broken her family, and in return, she had given his organization something it never had: a soul. "We're not done," she said, her eyes reflecting the growing light. "I know," Do-Hyun replied, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "That's why I'm here." They stood together at the intersection of two worlds, the daughter of a commander and the supreme leader of the syndicate. The underworld still whispered about the night the Maid was saluted, but the truth was far more dangerous. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were the ones who ensured that the invisible people of the world were finally seen, and the monsters who hunted them were finally hunted in return. The silver Scalpel and the Silent Hawk had found a purpose beyond the bullet. They had found a way to turn blood into hope.